shocking statement. A $1,000 decoy just outplayed a multi-million-dollar EW suite and took the Black Sea Fleet's ammo with it. At Kinburn, Ukraine rode a 50-degree fog and a thermal inversion to degrade Doppler radar, then used fiber optic guided Shrikes the jammers couldn't touch, clearing the way for a Mura V5 carrying 700 pounds of explosives. Watch how fog, light-speed video links, and a split swarm blinded Pancer S1, killed its generator and radar, and triggered a chain reaction that left a 450-foot crater where Russia's logistics hub used to be. Before we move on, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Why did a wall of Russian jamming go quiet against 5 cheap decoys and a single heavy hitter? Because the fight never touched the spectrum those jammers owned. The defenders cranked the dials, flooded the air with power, and still the control links stayed clean. That silence wasn't a glitch. It was the result of an approach designed to live outside their weapons. The target sat behind concrete and doctrine. A hardened ammunition depot set into thick slabs and earth berms, guarded by a Pancer S1 with its X-band search and track radar, all under a KUCA/Krasuka class electronic warfare umbrella watching the Mykolaiv-Ochakiv corridor. The site was built for attrition, radar first, interceptors next, then jamming on top to break control links and blind seekers. On paper, the approach lanes were covered. In practice, the weather rewired the engagement. The window was narrow. A dense 50-degree fog rolled off the water and locked onto a thermal inversion layer. That boundary trapped cooler air near the surface and bent radar energy back toward the sea. Returns smeared, attenuation grew, and Doppler filters lost their edge at low altitude. Small drones with tiny radar cross-sections bled into the soup, flashing in and out at the edge of detection. Operators saw ghosting, then gaps, then bursts that looked like clutter. The range gates stayed wide, and low flyers slipped between thresholds that normally flag motion cleanly. The guidance twist broke the rest of the equation. Shrike FPV drones rode 7 miles of fiber optic cable as thin as a whisper. The line unspooled behind each airframe, carrying control inputs and high-definition video at light speed to operators miles away. No radio, no link budget to crush, no data link handshake to corrupt. The EW bubble swung a hammer at empty air while the drones stayed tethered by glass outside every jammer's mission set. This was doctrine versus a bypass. Russian defenses stack sensors and effects around RF. Detect, track, handoff, jam, and intercept. Ukraine stepped around the entire layer with light-through-glass links and passive navigation, then let the weather sand down the radars. The result wasn't brute force. It was subtraction. Take away RF control. Take away clean radar contrast. Leave a defender staring at 2 imperfect pictures and force a choice. The split swarm made that choice harder. 2 Shrikes went high and quick, climbing just enough to seed the scope with a brighter return and draw the search beam. 3 skimmed the shoreline, staying in the ducted layer, using the fog to mask their signatures. 1 swarm fractured into 2 distinct patterns. On the console, 2 clusters appeared and vanished as the inversion tugged the beam. 1 looked heavier, 1 looked close. There was no time to resolve both. Research on inversion layers explains the effect. When warm air sits over cooler air, the refractive index gradient bends radar paths, creates multipath, and raises the sea clutter floor. Clutter filters and Doppler processing lose contrast at grazing angles, so low RCS contacts blink between bins and require manual confirmation. Operators must choose which intermittent track gets a firing solution while the automation hesitates. As the EW suite poured noise across the bands, the fiber ignored it. Operators watched steady, clean feeds, no lag, no hash, and threaded the drones around search lobes and tracer arcs. They flew to angles that hid behind berm edges, then slid along the blind sectors the radar left when it tried to gate out clutter. The defenders saw smears. The attackers saw the gate, the mast, and the generator housing with crisp edges. So the answer lands simple. Fiber optics carried control and video outside RF, so the jammers couldn't cut the link. The inversion and fog reduced radar contrast at low altitude, carving a blind spot the size of a corridor. With the door cracked open, the decoys only had to make one man pick wrong, and that choice would expose the generators and the array. The radar operator thought he caught the main threat. He was watching the wrong screen. On his console, 2 tracks bloomed and faded through the fog. One cluster pulsed brighter, tall on the scope and jittering with multipath. The other hugged the noise floor, sliding along the edge of the berms and vanishing near the mast's shadow. Doctrine told him where to look. Shield the radar, intercept the closest mass, and keep the mast alive. He set priorities in seconds, because seconds were all he had. The heavy drone didn't rush the gate. The Mura V5 eased a few degrees off axis and floated into the search beam, throwing a clean, tempting return to soak attention. Behind it, the Shrikes split. 2 lined up on the generator housing, thin sheet metal, cooling louvers, and no armor. Another pair shifted to the radar array support, the exposed node that kept the eye steady. Those were the pieces that mattered. Without stable power and a live array, the launcher had teeth but no target. The electronic warfare crew twisted the power up, bands filled with noise. Hash crept across the Russian command display and stayed there, a gray shimmer that made numbers swim. Target handoff stalled a half-breath longer than it should. Cursor jumps. A flicker. The fiber optic links ignored it all. Ukrainian operators saw steady video and crisp outlines of the generator's frame and the array's hinge, and kept flying their lines. Then came the mistake. The operator committed interceptors to the noisier cluster, the one that looked heavy and screamed on the scope. He tied mast to threat and sent missiles at the brighter group. The quieter track, smeared by the inversion and hidden in the ducted layer, stayed low and moved untouched toward the generator pad. He believed he had the center of effort pinned. He didn't. Impact 1 hit like a breaker switch. A Shrike drilled the generator housing, shredding cabling and knocking power stabilization out. The second Shrike crossed half a heartbeat later and ripped through the radar array support. The mast lost alignment and the set went blind. The Pancer sat there, missiles loaded, servos ready, but the world outside turned to static and darkness. With sensors down, point defense lost the math. No clean tracks, no predictive solutions. The launcher could still fire, but it would be guessing. The Mura V5 rolled back onto the center line and started its run. No weave, no fear of lock. It took the gate straight, low and steady, and carried its 700-pound warhead to the seam in the slab. The blast did the rest. Overpressure peaked around 5,000 psi at the breach, enough to tear rebar and turn 3 feet of concrete into chunks and dust. Inside, stacked munitions lifted, slammed, and broke. Heat built fast. Rocket propellant began to cook, then flashed. The fire didn't spread. It fed itself. The chain went shell to shell, rack to rack, until the entire cell became a furnace pushing close to 2,000 degrees. The depot folded inward. Walls fell, beams twisted, and the floor peeled back around a new crater wider than a football field. Post-strike imagery fixed the scar at about 450 feet across, dead on the depot's grid. The site stopped being a warehouse and became a hole that breathed smoke for hours. Ammunition that fed ships and batteries in the sector vanished in one morning. A $1 million system had steered itself off target under pressure from cheap networked drones. The jammers jammed, the radar searched, and the only links that mattered ran through glass, not air. And this strike slotted into a pattern that kept pushing the Black Sea Fleet backward, base by base and pier by pier, until movement looked like risk, not routine. The battlefield isn't just RF anymore. When guidance rides glass and weather-shaped sensors, $1 million suites go blind for the cost of a hobby drone. That's the takeaway from Kinburn's fog window and fiber-guided Shrikes. It exposed a doctrine gap you can't jam away. So what happens when these methods scale across an entire coastline on a stormy night? Ports dimension, convoys stall, and the sea turns into a sensor maze.